Balbinus, officially known as Marcus Balbinus, was a Roman emperor who ruled briefly in the year 238 CE during the tumultuous period of the crisis of the 3rd century, a time marked by political instability, military anarchy, and the frequent turnover of emperors. His reign is noteworthy for its association with the rise of multiple co-emperors and the military and political chaos that characterized the Roman Empire in the mid-3rd century. Little is known about the early life of Balbinus. His full name was Marcus Balbinus, and he hailed from a distinguished Roman senatorial family which placed him in the political elite of the empire. He is believed to have been born around the late 2nd century CE, although the exact date of his birth remains unclear. It is known that he was well educated, possibly in rhetoric and law, which was typical for members of the senatorial class. His political career began under the reign of Emperor Septimius Severus, r. 193 to 211 CE, although details about his early career and ascent to prominence are scant. Balbinus was a member of the Senate and was appointed to various administrative roles throughout his career, earning the respect of his contemporaries. He was known to have held high office in the Roman government, likely serving as consul before ascending to the imperial throne. His connection with the Senate would later play an important role in his rise to power during the crisis of 238 CE. The period from the late 2nd to the mid-3rd centuries is often referred to as the crisis of the 3rd century, a time in which the Roman Empire was beset by external invasions, internal political strife, economic difficulties, and a rapidly changing imperial leadership. The situation was particularly volatile after the assassination of Emperor Alexander Severus in 235 CE. Following his death, the empire endured a series of short-lived emperors, many of whom were either assassinated or overthrown by military revolts. The crisis was exacerbated by the rise of military anarchy, where Roman generals, often stationed at the borders, were elevated to the imperial throne by their troops. These emperors were typically soldiers with no formal senatorial background and often lacked political experience. Their reigns were marked by the necessity of military success rather than administrative skill, which led to widespread instability. The crisis reached a high point in 238 CE, which is sometimes called the Year of the Six Emperors, when multiple individuals laid claim to the imperial title, leading to political fragmentation. This year saw the deaths of several emperors and the rise of new ones, among them Balbinus. In 238 CE, the empire was embroiled in a civil war, and after the death of the usurper Maximinus Thrax, the Senate sought to restore order by appointing two co-emperors, Balbinus and the young Gordian III. The Senate's decision to elevate Balbinus was likely a response to the Senate's desire to assert its authority over the increasingly powerful military, and Balbinus's selection reflected the Senate's hope to return to a more traditional senatorial form of rule after the rule of military emperors like Maximinus Thrax. Balbinus shared the imperial throne with Gordian III, who was only 13 years old at the time of his elevation. The arrangement was somewhat unusual, as Balbinus was an older and more experienced figure, while Gordian III was a mere boy, likely considered a figurehead for the Senate's interests. In this co-emperorship, Balbinus held seniority and took on the primary responsibilities of ruling. Balbinus's reign was immediately challenged by military unrest. The empire was facing significant threats from external forces, particularly from the Persians, as well as from rebellious military factions within its own borders. Balbinus's time as emperor was thus primarily consumed with trying to maintain the stability of the empire in the face of these challenges. One of the notable events during Balbinus's reign was his involvement in the defense of Rome itself. The city faced potential threats from the forces of Maximinus Thrax, who had been killed by his own soldiers, but not before he instigated a rebellion. The Senate had hoped that Balbinus, with his senatorial background, would be able to rally Roman forces against these external and internal threats. However, his leadership was challenged by the fact that the military largely preferred the youthful Gordian III over the older Balbinus, who struggled to command the loyalty of the troops. Balbinus's reign lasted only a few months before it came to a tragic and violent end. In July of 238 CE, amid mounting pressure and unrest, the soldiers in Rome, dissatisfied with the co-emperors, turned on them. The Praetorian Guard, the elite unit tasked with protecting the emperor, killed Balbinus and his co-emperor Gordian III in a coup. The exact circumstances of their deaths are unclear, but the sources agree that both emperors were murdered by the Praetorians in a bloody revolt. Balbinus was reportedly strangled, and the body of Gordian III was later found under suspicious circumstances. Their deaths marked the end of their brief co-reign and also signaled the instability of imperial rule during this period. Their assassination paved the way for the eventual rise of Philip the Arab, who would go on to become emperor later that year. Balbinus's death contributed to the ongoing political chaos of the 3rd century. The crisis of the 3rd century continued for several decades, with numerous emperors rising and falling at the hands of the military, and the empire struggling to maintain its borders and internal cohesion. Balbinus's reign was part of a broader trend in which the role of the emperor became increasingly subject to the will of the military rather than the Senate or traditional political structures. In terms of his legacy, Balbinus is largely remembered as a figurehead, a symbol of the Senate's attempts to exert authority in an era dominated by military rule. His reign was marked by the ongoing instability of the Roman Empire, and his murder highlighted the fragility of imperial power during the crisis of the 3rd century. Though he was largely a puppet emperor in the eyes of many, his short and troubled reign exemplified the broader challenges of leadership and governance during one of the darkest periods in Roman history. Balbinus's reign is mostly remembered by historians as a brief, uneventful episode in the history of the Roman Empire. However, his story underscores the extreme volatility of the 3rd century and the rapid rise and fall of emperors during the crisis of the 3rd century. His reign, while short-lived, exemplifies the fragility of power in a period when political authority was constantly shifting and the emperor's survival often depended on the loyalty of the military rather than the stability of government institutions. Though little is remembered of him in popular culture or historical memory, Balbinus's brief time on the throne remains an important chapter in understanding the instability and transformations of the Roman Empire during the 3rd century.